Welcome to Midway Wool. Woven Picot is a really fun stitch that works really well for bird beaks and for flower petals. This is woven Picot, and it isn't attached at both ends. So it has a base, but the end of the woven Picot is not attached to the wool. It's a woven stitch. And so we're going to show you how to do this. You start with an anchor pin, and I'm going to do it along this straight edge to show you. You need an anchor pin. You need you don't want to use an applique pin. You want to use a little longer pin. And I'm going to do it along the edge of this little stem that I've whip stitched down. So you're going to determine how long you want this woven Picot. So if I put my little anchor stitch in there, that means my woven Picot is going to be about a half of an inch, a little more than a half of an inch long. If you want a longer one, then you adjust your anchor pin accordingly. So I'm going to make it a little shorter here. So that's going to be the middle of my woven Picot. So that's my anchor pin. I need that. I'm going to be using a number 5 eleganza thread, a pearl cotton, and I'm going to use a number 22 chenille needle. I like number 22 chenille needle for number 5 thread. It has a bigger eye, it's a little bigger shaft. A number 24 chenille needle really is too small for this size thread, and I don't like a number 18 for this size thread because it's even larger than this thread. So this is a number 22 chenille needle that I'm using. With this stitch, make sure that you cut a length of thread to do a complete woven Picot. This isn't a stitch where you can add thread in the middle of making the stitch. So make sure you start out with enough thread. So to start the woven Picot, I'm going to come on the left-hand side of the anchor pin. If you're a left-handed stitcher, you would start on the right-hand side. I'm going to come up along the edge of my applique piece, which is my stem, and I'm going to wrap around that anchor pin. So that anchor pin's going to hold the thread up at the top. Then I'm going to take my needle down to the background, the same distance between this emerging thread and the anchor pin, the same distance, so that I end up with a little arch. Okay, so I have a little arch. Now I'm going to come back up right in the center of those two threads that make that arch. So I end up with 3 spokes. With this stitch, you have to have an odd number of spokes. These are I'm calling spokes, because we're going to be weaving back and forth and back and forth. If you have an even number, you're not going to be able to weave. It has to be an odd number of spokes. You could do 5, you could do 11, you can do any number as long as it's an odd number of spokes. I'm going to just do 3 with this. So I have my arch and I have this center spoke. Now I'm going to start to weave back and forth to give this little woven Picot its shape. So I'm going to use the back of the eye of my needle. If I use the point of my needle, I very easily could grab the wool, the background, with the point. So I'm going to use the eye of my needle. That will solve that problem. You could also use a tapestry needle, which has a blunt end on it if you wanted to. So now I'm going to start to weave. So I have my thread around that, my center spoke around that anchor pin. Now I'm going to go under the outside spoke, over the middle spoke, under the other outside spoke, and I'm going to pull it through. That's my first weave. Now, Make sure that your thread stays behind that anchor pin. And it's very important with the first couple of weaves that you pull that thread really tight, and that first line of weaving is right up against that anchor pin. If you don't do that, you're going to end up with a little loop at the end of your picot. Now, in order to not pull and distort these spokes, I like to just pull it tight, but hang on to the outside spoke with my needle so that it doesn't pull that spoke in. So that's the first course of weaving. Some weavers with woven picots will say turn it to the side and then go up and down and up and down. I like to turn mine upside down and just keep turning it right side up, upside down. So we came through that when we did our first weave, we went under, over, under. Now we're going to do just the opposite as we go back the other way. So I'm going to be over the outside spoke, under the middle spoke, over the other outside spoke. And I'm going to pull it through. Now, in order to have a nice straight edge, you want to pull it so that the thread is tight, but you don't want to distort it. So hang on to that spoke with your needle, pull it nice and tight. Now I'm going to flip it back over, and it's always nice to do this on a flat surface. So don't try to do it while you're holding it in your hands. Use a flat surface, it will help. So now I'm going to go under, over, under, and pull it through. Tighten that up. Push the weaves toward the top of the anchor pin. I'm going to flip it around, go over, under, over, and that's all you do. You're just weaving the opposite direction each time you turn your piece around. And just push those weaves so that they're nice and tight up against each other. If you have forgotten whether you went one way over, under, over, and you couldn't remember which way to go back, if you don't do it the opposite way of the previous weave, you will know because you'll pull out the previous weave. Just make sure that you're pushing those weaves up tight against each other. And as you get close to the end, or the base, to the end of your weaving, and you think, oh, that covered it up enough, just do it until you cannot see the bottom of those spokes. You don't want your picot to end up being loose. You want it as tight as possible. So you can still see that I have some spoke showing. So I'm going to just continue to do my weaving until I cannot see those spokes anymore. So when I finish off, when I end this, I like to come to the center. So this last weaving that I did, this next one that I would do, I would be coming over. So I'm just going to come over that spoke, and I'm just going to come down underneath the weaves in the center rather than on the outside. That way it will look continuous. So that's your woven picot. So when you take your anchor pin out, you end up having it so that it's not attached. And it makes, if you had a series of these around this flower, it would make darling, darling little flower petals. Now, if you were doing a beak and you wanted that to be secure, all you have to do is come back and just do a little stitch over the very end of that picot, and that will be enough to hold it down. So that's your woven picot.